Okay, I'm here with Prakash. Prakash, just keep going on and complimenting me. This is a great opening. Go ahead.
So yeah, what I'm saying is that essentially, it is great to see someone at your age trying to do the things that you're doing, right? Trying to run a company of your own, learning investment. That investment part is basically the one that definitely impresses me the most because in investing, right, it's all about time and compounding, right? And that is one thing that you will not get back. And I'm glad to see that, in this community, there are a lot of young people who are basically uh, coming up to the investing game, right? Tell me a bit about myself. I'm Prakash Ramadan. I live in the Boston suburbs, and
Have
I
you
was
lived in
born and brought
Boston
up
your whole life, or how long have you been there?
most of it. Yeah, I was born and brought up in India, and I immigrated here around 25 years back, and most of that my American life has been here, right? So about 25 years, and by profession, I'm a software engineer, and my roles past 10 to 15 years primarily has been in the engineering management level, middle management level at different companies.
So you don't do too much coding
Uh,
anymore. You do management now more.
Yeah, I'm currently retired.
Okay.
So I used to do middle management at technology companies, right? To name the last three or four: BlackBerry, Akamai, Wayfair, Amazon, and Amazon was a short stint, and currently I'm retired, right? So you can say that I'm retired, or you can say that I'm primarily an investor in the public markets, a little bit in the private markets, not much.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, that's who I am. I live in Boston suburbs with two kids, wife.
How old were you when you retired?
I just retired a couple of months back, 48 years.
48 years. That's about 20 years earlier than most people. So, I mean, how did that feel retiring at 48? That's a pretty big
It's
accomplishment.
Yeah, it's good, man. it is. I debated that, right? Especially leaving. It was not that easy to getting into a fan, right? And then leaving that, after a very short stint, that was not easy. Amazon is a great company, right? But at the same time, you everyone has only limited amount of time left in your life, right? So basically, um as you age, right? You sometimes keep thinking, right? The why behind, you're
What you're
working,
doing.
or
Yeah.
the why behind your investing and all of that, right? So for me, it all came down to that, when your investments start earning returns, basically more than your, yeah,
Then it's time
more
to
than
call
your
it.
salary or whatever, right? Then that's not a brag or whatever. I'm just saying, my story is that, right? And it is not not even I am a great investor, or that is how I retired. My story is not even that, right? My story is, it's just a grind, right?
Right.
It's just that I was able to do that at two or three good places. And one of the key things is, when I look back on it, it I just reflect on the fact that I never worked for any company where I didn't have an equity, right?
Right. Right.
And that just happened that way. It was not planned, but it just happened that way. And then when I got into very serious about investing, during the pandemic time frame, I was reflecting on this fact, right? Oh, equity is the path to wealth, right? Normally, you don't get to think too much about these kind of things. You're going through your 9 to 5, 9 to 6, whatever that grind is, right? And basically just collect the paycheck, go on with your life, not think, that path fully through, where you want to go, why you want to go, And for me, pandemic was the time for that reflection. And yeah.
So when did you, so I guess it's a two-part question. When did you really start investing in the public markets, and did the pandemic accelerate your time to focus on investing in the public markets?
Pandemic definitely accelerated my the pace of my investments and the time to focus on, right? I started investing, I would say, probably 10, 13 years back. That's when I started to basically, max out my 401ks and all of that, right? I mean, but more than that, right? I mean, coming from an immigrant, especially a Indian immigrant mentality, right? I mean, the savings is prime, whether you invest or not. I mean, savings is prime. So it just happened that basically during the that peak of the pandemic,
Yeah.
I had cash on the side to basically start going at it, right? I mean,
So you started investing 10, 13 years back. That's like 37, 38 years old, which means for the first 38 years of your life, you were saving cash, and you attribute that to kind of the mentality you were raised with, which is save, because if this money goes to shit in the market, then you'll look like an idiot. Was that kind of the reason you didn't invest earlier?
yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, that as and the other fact is I got burned also, right?
Mm.
I have a history of getting burned during the .com bust, that era, right? I mean, didn't have that much money to put into the market, but and didn't know much either, right? I mean, and then got burned, and then you move on with that, you focus on the things that you are good at, and then eventually you realize that there are a couple of books and couple of investors that definitely changed my life. One is The Simplest Path to Wealth. I don't know if you have heard of that.
No.
Yeah, that is an awesome book actually. I mean, there's a Google talk around that as well. So before the pandemic, I got to listen to that, and that's when I was like, oh man, I should basically really get serious about it, rather than wasting my time, because time is basically the.
And you picked a good time in the pandemic, right? Because that's when everything started going up.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I guess I want to transition it to Palantir. I mean, you have been actually, no, before we get to Palantir, because I've heard from a little birdie, you sold a stock a little too early and you regret it to this day. And I think it'll be a great lesson. I think you save it as a great lesson. It's why you're so adamant on Twitter to not sell some of your winners and just let them ride. Can you tell us the name of the company you sold that has now gone on many, many, many times of a return if you had not sold it?
Yeah. I mean, so it is that stock is Nvidia. It is like in 2008. I had some remnant money remaining from my .com bust era, right? I mean, in one of the accounts, and I was like, okay, let me see this, and Nvidia was coming up with the graphics cards around that time. Okay, bought it. It was at pre-split. It was probably at like around $12 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if you consider the split, it is probably at $2.
Right.
$2, $3 or something. For I only had like around 200 shares or something, and 5 years I completely forgot about it. Right? I mean, I go back and look at the account. It is like 5x the month. So yeah, I mean, didn't know better, just sold it. So that position alone would have been worth more than $1 million if I had basically and a $2,500 investment would have been probably close to $1 million. I don't know the exact amount after all the recent runs and everything, right? So that is the kind of mistakes that could happen, right? I mean, especially if you trade in and trade out of some of these things, right? I mean, it's not that I don't trade. I do, right? I mean, I don't talk much publicly about it because many of the folks are not basically mature to the point where they can responsibly do that, right? From an investment perspective. And anyway, I mean, one thing I forgot to mention, anything that we talk here is not financial advice, right? I mean, it is just our own experiences and journeys, right? So take it as that.
Agreed. So you sold Nvidia a little too early, which is kind of why you're pounding the table to probably not sell Palantir that early. So I guess here's the open-ended question for you, and then we'll get deeper into it. What excites you about Palantir as a software engineer, as an investor, and why do you think it has the potential to become a generational company?
So I'll say primarily from the software engineer perspective, right? If you think about how development works in many of these companies, right? I mean, I am very clearly I can say about all the tier 2 companies, right? Okay, you build a product, you don't really know how well that is received by the customer, right? I mean, when you go in, right? I mean, that is how traditionally, and then you learn, right, as you go along, right? There are better analytics tools that came along probably in the past 5-10 years, right? I mean, that is how you adapt your business, right? Now, where things have landed over the past 10 years, like, in the industry is that, like, you have so many of these different applications that are built on different data sets. But at the end of the day, these all data sets need to be connected together, right? I mean, for you to make any business sense out of it, it need to be connected together, right? So what generally happens today is that, like, okay, I mean, an executive wants an answer, right? Okay, how does our inventory look in this particular, like, warehouse, or which is our fast moving, like, SKU, right? There need to be analytics that is intentionally built on top, either using Grafana or, one of those tools. It need to be built up, right? So that is one aspect, right? The other aspect is that basically with all the cloud development and everything, how much time is spent on basically, like, cloud specific aspects of your product, right? Like if I want to deploy my product on GCP or Azure, how much time I'm taking to write, like, Azure specific code or AWS specific code, or basically, like, GCP specific code, right? And that will get tremendously reduced with some of the product lines that Palantir is coming up with, right? So that's definitely one aspect. I mean, it will connect the information together and give it to you in a way that it is more consumable. There are signals around it, right? All of that, right? So that is the usefulness aspect of it, right? I mean, and basically, I mean, the way I am seeing it is that, like, okay, the flow today is that, like, okay, if business need to understand, oh, there is a problem, we need to basically figure out the full details of how we can improve that situation. There has to be development work that need to happen. There has to be engineering cycles that need to be spent for that, right?
Right.
So instead of having that, they can, instead of spending that engineering time on building either the analytics or building basically knowledge around how to optimize things for the business, they can use it to really build the product, and then use some of these tools provided by Foundry or the competitors, right? I mean, to basically, like, get that insights around the business. So that is where it starts, right? That's how I got interested with the company, right? I mean, because some of the problems that they are solving are real world problems, right? I mean, having worked 25 years in multiple industries, I can tell you that, right? Now, it is even, that is at the very superficial level, right? Now, you get to the point where some of the products like Apollo, it is basically, like, even making your end-to-end deployments far more easier.
Can
That is
you
solving a
explain a little bit
developer's
of
problem.
can you explain a little bit from a software engineer's perspective? I don't know if you have the full grasp of it, but like, what is Apollo for those that are trying to understand?
I haven't used it, right, myself, so I can only tell it based on like, the videos that I have seen myself. I have seen, right, and some of the explanations that others like Coursera have given, right? I mean, but the problems are real, right? I mean, that they are trying to solve. It is like, okay, I want to deploy something to a service to AWS or Azure or GCP. I will not need to write any of the, like, this specific code, right? That gets taken care of in an abstraction layer, basically, right? And the other aspect is that basically there is effort, and these tool sets that are being used to deploy or find out the errors, rollback, all of that, they are not, like, there is no single tool, right? At least where I have seen is basically you use Jenkins to build things, like, and then you use another tool to do the CI/CD pipelines, all of that, right? Instead of that, you get a holistic solution where you can deploy it to any platform, basically, right? And that is basically, like, again, improving the productivity, right?
And as a developer, you can see the use case for that in any technology company.
Any technology company, right? I mean, that is why Cisco signed up for it, right? So yeah, so that could even become a much more bigger TAM even compared to Foundry, right? But yeah, I mean, we talked about a couple of product angles there, right? I mean, and look at the other new one, AIP, right? Look at what I'm most impressed about Palantir is the fact that they are coming up with these product lines just so quick, man. Right? I mean, yeah, I mean, it was a monolith product line initially, right? But then from there, they are basically spinning off things or putting wrappers to give different viewpoints of that same product or different, aspects of that product standalone. That is happening very quick, right? So that is definitely one of the bull cases there, right? I mean, and now, yeah, I mean, and I'm not, when I was with on Christian's channel, right? I did make the statement that this could easily be a 10x, right? A multi-bag, and I stand with that still, right? I mean, not financial advice, right? But that's where still I am, right? I mean, it could. I don't see any bear case on why this will not get to $100 billion company.
Right.
Now, beyond that, there is definitely there are definitely problems, right? Beyond that $100 billion, I mean, to become a $1 trillion company, right? I mean, as you can see with some of these latest developments, right? I mean, companies like either an Oracle or a Microsoft, they are not going to sit back and take this competition just like that. I mean, we are going to see one heck of a competition coming from those kind of companies, and maybe even sabotaging, right? I mean, it is survival essentially, right? I mean, if you believe what Alex Karp said, it's like we are going to take the whole market. I don't think these companies are going to let them do that, right? I mean, so worst case, I mean, it will be a $50 to $100 billion company, right? I mean, it will remain there. And my expectations are basically okay, by 2030, it's at least a $100 billion company, right? And it could there can definitely be cases made that it could go beyond that and far beyond that, right?
Yeah.
But the journey is difficult indeed, right? I mean, there are. I mean, if you are interested in talking about the bear cases, we can, right?
Yeah. Okay. So we'll get to the bear cases in a little bit. I want to ask you one more question. As a software developer, when you said businesses need to have this kind of view of their business in terms of problems they need to solve, and they don't have time to build out entire analytic solutions just for one problem, which is why you could put everything into Foundry and keep going from there, or any other type of Palantir product. I guess here's the question. Like in 1999 to 2005, if you didn't have an internet presence, you started to get left behind. And so the idea was, if you don't own a .com, at least start to begin the process of migrating your business into the internet. And then by 2006 to 2015, it was like, if you're not on the cloud, if you're still on-prem, you need to start migrating off that. Do you see Palantir's data analytic solution for businesses in combination with AIP as being the next wave of, you need to be on the internet, you need to be on the cloud, now you need to have a full set of AI analytic-based tools in order to stay competitive in a market where every other business is optimizing their processes because of these analytic services? Do you think Palantir is positioned to be in a place where every company, organization, government in the world needs to have some set of analytic services in order to be optimized?
Yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, and that is probably to a certain extent, right? If this whole ChatGPT thing had not come up, I don't think, I mean, some of the doors would have opened, right? Let's think about it. I mean, I'll get to that, a specific AIP related question, right? I mean, how that is going to change the game. Let's think about, okay, Foundry is what Palantir develops is a modern enterprise operating system, right? So essentially, the question is basically, who are they trying to replace? I mean, they're not trying to replace Snowflake, right?
Yeah.
They're not, right? I mean, they're trying to replace basically either a Microsoft or an Oracle or an SAP, right? Snowflake is not even a competition, right? It is, and think about how hard it is to get to that position. Like how hard it would have been for Oracle to get their base, right? And that is the reason why we need to be patient as investors there, right? I mean, and I think they are definitely making good gains there, right? And now coming to at least what I have heard about the implementation process before is that basically most of the friction points where that people have to change the workflow, right? If I'm working in a company and my company is adopting Palantir Foundry, I have to change the workflow, entire workflow, right? And that probably got up some friction, right? That is probably the reason why the pace of adoption is not going through the roof, right? But at the same time, right, now look at it, what AP will do. AP will bring this to basically CCU, right? Without changing any of the workflows, they can basically have AP connected to the these specific data sources. It will bring that product to the CCU, right? So executives can basically ask all of these questions, right? Okay, which part of my business is doing well, which is not, what happens, if I want to shift the inventory from this warehouse to the other warehouse, what are the financial implications of it? Those kind of questions. These are the questions that executives ask on a day-to-day basis to their reports, right?
Right.
So if they can get the answers directly, that gives the room. Okay, this product is good. Where else can we use this? Right? That is where that expansion will come, right? We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair case, because the more I've started to understand, I've never worked at a technology company. I'm trying to build my own technology company, and there's a bunch of questions I have to ask every single day to be able to get answers at a large scale. As you said with ChatGPT, I'm using it every day for very simple things, and I'm getting answers almost instantaneously. And then I'm going back to my work because it's just creating productivity for me. So I imagine at a company, at a very large organization, if you have some type of LLM that can give you answers that are based on proprietary data within the company, specific answers like inventory, for example, that Shyam was showing in his demo, and then you just move on with your life because you got the answer and you keep going, it makes you more productive. At a surface level, that sounds like simple, but then when you actually start using it and imagining it scale throughout sales, accounting, marketing, finances of logistics in the business, you're like, this should be able to increase the revenue for the business and reduce costs. And if a tool can do that, it's game over, because then you're never going to leave that tool.
Yeah, it's the productivity boost, right? And productivity boost to the bottom line of the company. There are several examples that you yourself have given based on these case studies, right? What is that? $12 to $6.
Yeah, for BP.
Barrel. Yeah. So yeah, they will definitely improve the bottom line. And the approach that they are also doing is they are going industry by industry, right? Yeah. And building out some of these use cases into the base product, right? So that there will be an inflection point where, oh yeah, we got 80% or 90% of the use cases already implemented. Now it is basically let's get the equivalent of Oracle or SAP certified engineers to go and do the implementation, rather than basically
well, speaking on that point, here's a question. I just want your raw answer to this. Should Palantir be valued as a consulting firm?
No. Why? They are just in the. Their margins are actually much better than a consulting firm, right? Yeah. This is how they gain the initial traction, but that's about it, right? They have a very clear product line, right? Even the pace at which they are coming up with the new product lines, I don't think big companies can do that, right? Big companies, it is very difficult to move a ship, right? For a Google or a Microsoft, it is a bit difficult to navigate that. But for a company 3,000 people, they can basically switch the priorities basically like that. And I believe that's exactly what happened. They probably had to some of these things that are currently like AIP, right? This might have been in their product roadmap. It's just that they were not anticipating that it will need to be this soon, right? And with ChatGPT, probably a majority of their roadmap actually got accelerated, because the time is now, right? It is now or never. Basically, now is the time to strike, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think on the it goes hand in hand with the thing you just said before, which is they're solving problems for larger industries. And so if you consult with BP in the oil and gas industry, when you get new clients in that same space for renewable energy, you've done so much R&D working with this multi-billion-dollar company on how to implement analytic-based services into an organization like that it's much easier for the next one. And I also think that's part of the moat of Palantir, right? Like when you actually go into an organization and build something custom for them and work with them, it allows that organization to really never leave your product, which should just which should pay for the consulting itself, the forward deployed engineers. And then it just provides network effects in terms of the data you generate to be able to help other clients in the future. How do you feel about Alex Karp as a CEO?
He's great. And one of the greatest salesmen that you can you can probably find, right? I mean, and look at the tables where he's getting a seat, right? If a company's CEO is getting the respect of national leaders, right, directly having conversations with them, right? I don't see a Snowflake CEO doing that. I don't see I mean, the other CEOs who are in that league are basically trillion-dollar companies, right?
Yeah, that's
so. And this true. Is just up until a month back, it was that nobody wanted to buy this, and it was at a $15 to $20 billion market cap company, right?
Do you feel his eccentricities add to his mystique as a CEO, which actually gets people more excited, customers and investors? Or do you think it plays a downside in terms of his overall?
Right. It gets interest. A part of it is probably theatrics too, right?
That's what I think. I'm so glad you said that. I think that's what I think he's a performer. I think so.
Yeah. So, I mean, and he's good, man. I mean, we have been primarily talking about all the bull cases here, right? I mean, at the same time, there are bear cases, right? I mean, bear cases are primarily for it to not get to a valuation that it really deserves, right? And $100 billion, I mean, it will get there, right? I mean, you give it the enough time, it will get there. Beyond that, there are things that need to get addressed to go beyond that, right?
So let's get into that. What are some of, I guess, if you want to give me top 3, some bear cases that not only don't get it to a good valuation, but legitimately it's like a $30 stock by 2030, $40 stock. What would have to go wrong for that to happen?
So the first thing in that list is basically the certification aspects, right? They need to basically bring in the developer community along much more quicker. Maybe there are things that are happening that we don't know about, right? But these kind of conversations has been going on for more than a year now, right? So that is definitely, I think, I mean, one of the Achilles heel. But as you know, I mean, PwC and others are probably picking up on it, right? I mean, with experts like WhatsApp, right? I mean, so that should address that. But
can you explain why that's important? Why incorporating this certification for developers is a bull case ultimately?
Because it will not scale, right? So say the demand is basically okay. I mean, they have 300 or 500 incoming requests for AIP. How are you going to basically go ahead and and there is at least a week worth of configuration needed.
Yeah.
From what I understand is to get it up and running, right? I mean, at least 2-3 days worth of configuration needed to get it up and running, right? And if you have to send an engineer to every place or a team to every place, right? I mean, to get this up and running, how scalable would that be, right? So that's why, I mean, okay, I mean, this is not, it's not like, I mean, basically, this is a model that has not been successful. It has been a successful model, right? I mean, Oracle did the same thing, SAP did the same thing, using third party, right? I mean, to OEM deals to basically go ahead and do the configuration and deployment for their software, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, so that is the first case, right? The second case is basically that I don't know fully about is basically the threat of open source, basically in this. I don't know how much you have looked into it, but I have only started looking into what are some of the other options, right? I mean, so if you look at some companies like Anthropy, they do similar things, right? I mean, at least they claim to do similar things, and they seem to even have a seat at some of the discussions, right? I mean, regarding all the restrictions needed for generative AI. So there are multiple smaller companies and open source,
How do you
players.
reconcile an open sourced platform with a company's proprietary data? Is that possible to even work together?
It's possible, right? I mean, even today, I mean, all of these cloud providers, they take open source and basically adapt it the way they need it, right? And use it, right? So that will take time, right? For that to pan out. And Palantir already has a ready product. So now is the time, basically, strike before that happens. So that is primarily the second, bear case there is like what else is coming, right? I mean, and the third one is obviously these large companies are not going to basically sit idle, right? Starting with Microsoft, Oracle, I don't know if you followed the Oracle earnings and the Oracle earnings call recently.
A little bit of it, not most.
Yeah, they seem to be having something up their sleeve. I listened to the Oracle earnings call actually. I mean, I was like, okay, what is the big deal here, right? And Larry Ellison seemed to be very confident in that he will basically take on a big chunk of the entire AI play. And coming from a veteran who has been in the industry for 40, 50 years, I don't think it is something that could be just discarded, right? I mean, they are partnering with Nvidia. Nvidia uses the Oracle Cloud, so it is they could be the wild card here, right? I mean, I'm not saying with respect to Palantir, but in general in the AI world, I mean, Oracle could be the wild card. So players like that definitely be a reason why it might not reach a massive kind of valuation, right?
Let me ask you this question, piggybacking off Oracle and Nvidia. Nvidia is now a $1 trillion company, and what I think investors are giving the premium to Nvidia for, even after they've gotten premium after premium after premium, is they basically have a monopoly on GPUs and chips. And there's some competition, but there really isn't, and that's why the guidance went up 60%. And if the guidance keeps going up, this thing could get really, really funny over the next couple of years. Most people, I've seen a lot of people say Nvidia is a true AI play. Because they're designing the chips. Tesla with FSD is a true AI play. Microsoft with their LLMs and OpenAI, true AI play. Palantir is not a true AI play. It's just the picks and shovels for a company to be able to optimize with AI. Is that a bear case? Is that a negative? And do you think Palantir can eventually become a true AI play? Do they even need to be a true AI play? What are kind of your thoughts regarding that?
I mean, who else exists other than basically a very early stage startup or some attempts in the open source? What else exists today to basically that enables you to? I'm sure OpenAI has some tools probably, right? I mean, to help them configure their LLMs or train their LLMs. But are those developed to the point where basically it could be commercially made available?
Right.
I doubt it.
Right.
They probably can do it with the APIs. I mean, if you follow some of the leaderships, right? I mean, I was listening to one of the comments from Wayfair CTO. They are going to use the OpenAI APIs for majority of the use cases, right? Or at least some of the use cases. That's what from one of the calls I understood. So there are going to be players who will directly use that, right? I mean, and there will be players who need much higher restrictions, compliance, standards, all of that, right? I mean, you cannot have those OpenAI calls from medical data, basically from a software that deals with medical data, right? I mean, the patient data, right?
Right. It's not possible.
So those kind of yeah. So
can you speak to that? Because Bank of America gave Palantir a price upgrade from 13 to 18, primarily on this idea that they are seeing Palantir as a regulatory, compliant, ethical, privacy, data focused implementation of AI infrastructure. And their kind of argument was, we don't really see any other companies that can actually do that at scale. So even with the declining growth, we think that will reaccelerate because all this demand is coming because of this very reason. How important is that for a hospital or a company to have a safe implementation of their data be structured. And how much of that is a moat, do you think, for Palantir?
Well, that is the moat, right? Primarily because one, privacy reasons, right? I mean, you don't want any of these patient data to basically go into some random APIs, right? And figure out basically okay, what is the relevant insight from that, right? The other part is basically the compliance aspect of it, right? I mean, so you need to basically clearly show, okay, if a patient basically comes in, gets admitted to a hospital, something unfortunate happens, right? Say there is a lawsuit or whatever, right? What happens at that point of time? You need some clear evidence of going back and seeing hey, what were the steps that were taken? What was the history? Who approved this? Right? I mean, and all of that. Right? I mean, and if you see some of the AAP demos, that kill chain, right? I mean, that they're talking about, that has a lot of use cases in medical fields, medical industries. It has a lot of use case in financial industries, legal, so where you need to keep track of the entire history of that transaction, as well as basically the command chain for it, right?
Right.
You can't let the model make a decision, right? In many of these situations, I mean, it could in many of these cases it could be a life or death kind of situation, right? And you need to have that control handed off to the human to make that control. And then from a compliance perspective, you need to have the ability to go back and look at okay, what was the path followed here, right? And they already have a system that is built for that. So that market, I don't think there is any competition,
right?
Honestly.
Yeah. And, it's so funny because, we've been hearing Karp talk about this whole data privacy thing for so long in a philosophical sense. And it's like kind of crazy because, as you said, it's such a nuanced time and interesting and exciting time to be a Palantir investor, because I don't think the stock goes from 7 to 16 if ChatGPT doesn't become mainstream, because then AIP and AI doesn't have the relevance that it does. And I think we would still be a $7 stock because it would be just seen as this black box company that isn't making any progress. And in a couple months, things change. And that, I think, is a testament to the rate of innovation in technology, because it's there and then it goes up and you're either in it or you're out, because now the people that want to get it back at 7 or 8, but it might be very hard given the market has fundamentally shifted their sentiments towards how they value these types of companies. And compliance now becomes a thing. Data regulation becomes important. Karp said 2 years ago, hey, companies are going to care about this. It took 2 years, but now it's here, and it happened in 2 months when it finally did happen in regards to the stock price. So it's just so interesting to kind of see how this all plays out. Here's my kind of last question for you. In terms of this as a stock, do you see it as one of the best stocks to buy over the next 10 years? Is your portfolio allocated heavily towards it, or how do you feel about this in comparison to other stocks? Other opportunities in the
definitely,
market?
yeah. This is the biggest holding that I have.
Wow.
And it is so my investment strategy is that basically I do obviously from that age perspective, right? I'm 48 years old, so I don't want to lose all my money and then go back to work again, basically, right? So I have a
you're trying to stay
strategy,
home,
right? I mean, so essentially 60% of my family's investments are primarily in SPY or FXAX, one of those index funds, right? And 30% is basically in stocks, individual stocks. And out of that stocks, my goal was basically 30%. Out of that 30% of investment, no single stock I wanted to go more than 10% of that entire investment, right? I mean, and now it is it is more than 10% of my net worth. So
and your average is in the $8-9 range, I'm assuming, correct?
Yeah.
Wow.
I've been buying all over the place, right? I mean, and it was primarily the community was definitely helpful in understanding how the product is used, how people talk about the product in some of the cases that Sachin was mentioning. That all gave up the confidence, right? I mean, you wouldn't believe it. At one point last year, I was excited about getting a paycheck, man. Excited about getting a paycheck because I can buy 1,000 more Palmer or buy,
Wow.
It is like that. I mean, so it is the biggest position in my portfolio, but that's not the only one, right? I mean, so right behind it I have Google, and then right behind that I have Amazon, and then a whole bunch of other things, right? So Yeah, that's
Okay.
my
Here's my
approach.
actual last question to you, because I think you're going to be the best person, and you have a little bit more of the best wisdom to answer this question. We actually got this on Palantir Weekly yesterday. Someone has 5,000 shares at $8, and they're up $40,000. And the question was, should I sell? Now, obviously, I can't answer that. You can't answer that. Personal finance, you have to make your own decisions. It's all contextual based on you. If you actually need $40,000, then yeah, like go ahead and sell. To someone who probably doesn't need the gains right now in their bank account, that doesn't need to buy a Tesla with their gains, what is your advice to someone who got in at the right time at $6, $7? They're up over 150% on their money, and they're thinking to just sell and take their wins. What is your advice to that person in regards to specifically holding their Palantir?
So my case, like, it again depends on the personal situation, right? So not an advice, right? I mean, if you really need the money, you sell it, right? I mean, but if you don't want to cut the flowers yet, there is still more growth. That is for sure, right? There is still for more. Imagine the NHS deal comes through, right?
Yeah.
Many of these commercial contracts come through, right? Where does the stock go? See, the way I think about it is one of the, I mean, okay, people can say that this is one of the most speculative investments. The way I see it, this is one of the most conservative investments.
I agree.
Right? I mean, a company with, I mean, $3 billion in the bank, right? It is, and that is that amount is only getting increased with every earnings, right? No debt, right? Say the company grows only like, I mean, 18%, 17%, 18% a year. I'm fine with that. Because out of that 17%, 18%, I mean, eventually what will happen is all of that growth actually goes to the bottom line, basically, right?
Yep.
And because they are not spending extra money on R&D, right?
Stock-based compensation is coming down aggressively.
Yeah, compensation is coming down, launching more and more products, more and more customers, right? It's one of the most conservative investments, at least for me, basically, right? Price could fluctuate, right? But I can sleep well at night knowing the fact that, like, you got somebody like Alex Karp running the company, and they got a clean balance sheet, right? And they're going to keep returning the value to shareholders. And there is some misconception even about the dilution, right? I mean, I haven't looked that up recently, but even with the dilution, I don't think the dilution is as big as basically, like, people are worried about or care about, right? Because if you look at I did look at it initially when I don't remember the exact numbers, but when the S1 filing itself, the number was pretty big, right? Yeah. The difference was that at that time, what I read was that, like, majority of the options were not, like, converted to individual stocks, right?
Right.
So these options were still outstanding. It is not like, they are printing it like there is no tomorrow, right? It is like these options, even the time of S1 filing, they had the options, right? It's just that, see, with the approach that they did for the DPO, those options get exercised and come to the market. It shows up as basically more share count, basically, right? Yeah. So at least that's what I remember there. I mean, do you know?
I mean, yeah, I think we're going to get 2-3% dilution per year, which is not crazy. As long as the rate of growth increases from there, then it should be fine. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. And eventually, I think we will see share buybacks. It's just right now, there's no point to do it because you're growing.
Yeah. What are they going to do with these, basically, like, with say they get another couple of $1 billion in the next year or two, right? What are they going to do, right? They are going to, if I'm not mistaken, they are going to be printing, like, close to $800 million a year.
Yeah.
So and one of the other aspects, Amit, is that basically we have a pretty good community that is going, and we do talk about basically, like, the bear cases and basically where's the chink in this armor, right? We try to poke at that. I don't see that from many other communities, including Tesla, right?
Yeah.
And so I have a position in Tesla. It's not a big position. I bought average down when it was at, like, $100 or $102, right? But I'm not raising my position again at these levels for Tesla, right? Because it could. I get that initially I didn't understand the Tesla case, right? I mean, I get that now, right? I mean, that it's not a car play, it is basically EV, energy, combined everything, right? And imagine with the case of bots and all of that, right? But I haven't seen much discussions around, hey, what could go wrong,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
A lot of it is assuming that Elon's just going to figure it out, which he deserves, but
yeah, he
it's like,
deserves, right? I mean, and
yeah.
he might, right? I mean, he might very well do that, right? It's just that what's the chink in the armor here, right? I mean, is it the customer service? Is it the delays in FSD or Cybertruck? Is it that, like, the semi is not performing as they are expected to? I don't know, right? I mean, I'm not
And that's why, I think it's a good point you bring up, because the Tesla community is great. It's fantastic. It's just the stock has run up to $700 billion. And so with the Palantir community at 30 billion, I think even when it was at 20 billion, every day, I think for the past year and a half on Reddit, Twitter, YouTube, we have discussed the bear case, because we were living in the bear case. I mean, when you're under $6, you are in the bear cave. You're actually in the bear cave. You're not just writing articles for the bear cave. So when you're in the bear cave, you're realizing what could go wrong and how the hell do we get out of this cave? And slowly, we started realizing, like, no, this stuff actually matters. And then AI kind of saved it and brought it into a new momentum. But still, we talk daily about what could go wrong. And I think when you have a community that is that healthy in terms of discussion, if the stock goes to 30, I honestly think a lot of people, even if they'll be up 3x on their investment, will not sell. And you need a genuine community to feel that, because if you don't have a genuine community, you're up 300%, take it. But if you have a community that's saying, no, this has room to run, which is what Tesla had in 2018, 2019, you stay and you hold. And then when the institutions come, and then the S&P 500, then it really becomes like a fantastic story over the next 10 years.
Yeah. That's indeed the case. Yeah.
That is it. Prakash, thank you for joining. Happy I got to talk to you. I think a lot of people will appreciate your wisdom on this podcast. And this was fun. This was great. We'll definitely have you on again, and we'll keep talking.
Thank you so much, Amit. Take care, and you have a nice weekend.
Thank you, Prakash. Appreciate it. Talk later.
Thank you.
Bye.